are these people?
This first story, and I'm sure if you are an avid watcher of independent media, you would probably, especially if you watch independent commentators of color, you probably might know that a lot of our police state and a lot of their practices are based on what is being done in Israel. So last week I talked about, well, I reported on the expansion of Cop City in pretty much every state throughout the country, whether in some type of planning or some type of phase of being implemented. So again, if you did not watch that live stream or segment, you can go to our playlist and check it out. I'll strongly suggest that you watch that to give you some context to this. But this segment will kind of serve as a part two to that article that I read last week, which we reported on. So this was written. This article was based in ScheerPost, written by Victoria Valenzuela, and where she writes, "Deadly exchange. U.S. sends hundreds of law enforcement to Israel to learn worst practices from the IDF." So Victoria continues, and you'll have to scan because too bad we don't have reader mode anymore. Actually, I have to come a little closer for this. It is not no, that's not going to work.
Okay.
Zoom out. I'll do my best. Good thing I'm wearing my glasses.
Right.
It is not uncommon. Actually, I'll just read it from
the
my
article
screen. It's probably not any better, but yeah, whatever. I'll get through it.
Okay.
It is not uncommon for police to drive around with their lights flashing in Black and working class neighborhoods in Atlanta. This is a tactic used to intimidate and make their presence known. For residents of these neighborhoods, it can feel like psychological warfare. U.S. law enforcement learned this strategy from Israeli forces. Thousands of law enforcement officials have traveled to Israel to learn new repression strategies and surveillance techniques from the Israel National Police, Israel Defense Forces, and the Shin Bet, who inflict violence, crowd control, and surveillance onto Palestinians. Anti-imperialist advocates say the tactics being taught in the U.S. law enforcement were battle-tested on Palestinians and spread to the U.S. to target Black and Brown communities for a training relationship that grants Israeli forces more power and profit, causing further harm to Palestinians. These programs are facilitated by the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, and the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program, the latter of which started in 1996. U.S. leaders sought Israel's guidance to curb terrorism, and a deadly exchange of worst practices between the U.S. and Israeli forces was born. Federal, state, county, and mutual law enforcement executives, including local police departments, the FBI, and ICE, have traveled to Israel, while thousands of officials have attended conferences with Israeli experts in the U.S. An inaugural U.S.-Israeli security conference by JINSA occurred last month, where a former IDF commander was included as a guest speaker.
Yeah,
certain police practices. Yes.
Let's do that. There we go. Cool.
I was actually able to read it fine the way you had it.
Guest speaker. This we were right here, right?
Yeah. Further down.
Yep.
More
down.
Yeah.
More down.
Yeah, I was fine reading it as it was before.
Okay. Well, it's like,
but
it's a little
this will
easier
work
to read.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, I think this is just a way for you to see us and the article too.
Exactly.
That's why Reef is doing.
Yep.
Anyway, certain police practices and policies that all happen time and time again, when you look back and try to pull back on the thread to see where they got this from, it always comes back to someone went to Israel. Steve H., an organizer with the Black Alliance for Peace. Within these programs, worst practices are shared to promote and extend discriminatory and repressive policing practices that already exist in both countries. said Reina Salem, an organizer with the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. U.S. forces take whatever is working in Israel and they bring it here and inflict it on Black and brown people. Police departments in New York, LA, New Orleans, and Atlanta, among others, have close ties with Israeli forces. Salam said that the increasing militarization of U.S. police in recent decades is due in large part to the funding and support of Israel's brutal military occupation. She says that in return for these trainings, the state of Israel gets in good standing with the U.S. for future support, and its forces learn new tactics in return. Salam said that Israeli learned stop and frisk and racist traffic stop techniques from U.S. law enforcement.
Oh, good to know it goes both ways.
Yeah. At the detriment of melanated
everyone.
people, but
yeah.
There is strong opposition. Palestinian solidarity, racial justice, and local organizations are calling for an end to this deadly exchange, saying that it perpetuates settler colonialism and violence against marginalized communities and harms both people in the U.S. and in Palestine. They say that investments should be made into the community, not policing. It essentially brings together people, all these violent systems that oppress our people here in the United States and oppress Palestinians and Palestine together, Salem said. Our communities need to come together to organize against these police exchange programs. Any thoughts so far? Although I'm sure.
No, yeah, sounds familiar and what we've talked about frequently, you know?
Yeah.
So,
After George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin in 2020, advocates say that the knee-to-neck chokehold was used and perfected to torture Palestinians by Israeli occupation forces through 72 years of ethnic cleansing and dispossession. Members of the Minneapolis Police Department have been trained by Israeli officials. Following that, when thousands of protesters took to the streets in the Black Lives Matter uprisings, police used racial profiling, tear gas, and other repressive crowd control techniques, which I was witness to and I wouldn't say sustain injuries, but saw it and was inflicted on me, at least the tear gas and all that, to quell the protesters. Salam said many of those practices were exported from the violence of Israeli forces. When police started using different kinds of weaponry against protesters, Palestinians were already very, very familiar with that kind of confrontation, Salam said. Between 2002 to 2009, the LAPD chief and deputy chief traveled to Israel for training multiple times. The deputy chief traveled as part of JINSA's first cohort in their first law enforcement estrangement program. During these trips, Israeli companies, including the LAPD officials, to facial recognition and drone technology manufactured in Israel. The police department also developed a broken windows approach, which grows from the idea that constant policing of low-level disorder through the targeting of Black and brown communities with constant police surveillance harassment will somehow deter serious criminal activity.
Which we know how that works.
After nearly 10 years of training with Israeli forces, the New York Police Department was exposed to have a run of demographics unit that spied on Muslims and treated basic acts of daily living as potential crimes, which are techniques used by Israeli forces on Palestinians. In return, they adopted NYPD's data collection method. Certain police practices and policies that happen time and time again, when you look back and try to pull back on the thread to see where they got this from, it always comes back to somebody who went to Israel, said Stephen H., an organizer with Black Alliance for Peace. Officials in Atlanta, Georgia, are pioneers in the police exchange department program as well.
Yeah.
The Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program, housed at the University of Georgia, has been sending people to Israel every year for over 31 years. Stephen H. said that the trips are funded by private entities, the Department of Justice grants, and taxpayer dollars.
Oh,
Stephen H. also said that, yeah?
No, I was just taxpayer dollars. Of course that's going to send them over there.
Yeah.
You know?
But notice who is funding it.
Right.
So private equity, so corporations.
Probably places that also do the Cop City stuff, I'm betting.
Right. Which again, which again, like if you want to boycott those organizations, go to that stream or that clip.
Yeah.
There's a whole list there of organizations,
the Glee
corporations.
Program. not the other Glee program. This Glee program. Ugh.
Stephen H. also said that the Glee program also trains with Israeli forces through annual conferences in Atlanta and hosts law enforcement from around the country at these events. The training, he said, includes workshops and seminars. Musa Springer, also an organizer with Black Alliance for Peace, said that at least 43,000 people have participated in Glee workshops, conferences, and events. They said it creates danger for Atlanteans, as demonstrated in the police killings of Anthony Hill and several Black people in Atlanta.
Yep.
There's a sort of level of racial profiling that is sewn into the tactics, and then those racial profiling, which also takes place here in the US among us, becomes even stronger and more reinforced in the style of policing, Springer said. What we see is that Black residents, as well as activists and organizers who are mobilizing, are increasingly treated as terrorists. Out of Atlanta's collaboration with Israeli forces comes their Cop City police training facility, which is based off Israel's Little Gaza, a replica of the Gaza Strip.
I did not know this.
I did not know this either. At these facilities, police can battle test repressive techniques and surveillance. Stephen H. said that the Cop City and Little Gaza are meant to give the occupying forces a realistic training ground in which they can actually implement their counterinsurgency tactics on the occupied population. Anyone who goes there will be participating in the skills development of counterinsurgency, of how to better practice kettling, how to better practice shutting down or brutalizing peaceful protests, Stephen H. said.
Yep.
This is why, as I said last week, and I'll say it again, this is what Trump is inheriting, folks. And you're going to be more willing to protest now with an even beefier and more powerful police state now. Thanks, Biden. Thank you to our government for essentially giving police the weapons, if they want to kill you. Because that will be state-sanctioned violence, which is okay for the corporations and our government, being that this is meant to protect them and not you. Anyway, in addition to repressive tactics, advocates say that U.S. and Israeli forces both make use of surveillance techniques and technology that is Israel-based, like Celebrate, and predictive police software, like the software produced by Palantir.
Yep.
Lou Bloomberg, co-founder of Eye on Surveillance and a representative of the Jewish Voice for Peace chapter in New Orleans, said that in 2014, the Baton Rouge PD took a trip to Tel Aviv, which is funded by a government grant, the Jewish Federation, and other private entities. The goal was to learn about Celebrate, a universal forensics extraction device from an Israeli-based technology company, in order to bring the surveillance back to the U.S. Celebrite's technology was tested on Palestinians before its usage became widespread. Because Israel is occupying the Palestinian people, it creates what author Anthony Lorstein calls the Palestinian Laboratory for Israel to experiment and then get all this data about these surveillance tools and then to be able to sell that. Look how well these tools are working to criminalize these people. Don't you want that for your country? Bloomberg said. An organizer with New Orleans Stop Helping Police Israel's Ports, an organization dedicated to ending all ties between New Orleans institutions and businesses and Israel, who wish to remain anonymous, said that a lot of cameras the city of New Orleans has put out in the streets for surveillance uses Israeli technology. She said that law enforcement can often use BriefCam, an Israeli video surveillance technology now owned by the parent company Canon. As in
the camera company. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Ugh.
Hundreds of people in the U.S. have been arrested due to facial recognition technology, some of them falsely identified. People of color, particularly Black people, are more likely to be misidentified by facial recognition technology.
Of course they
The
are.
organizers said
They
that
fit the
Israeli
profile,
technology.
Collin.
Well, yeah. Saying that from someone who's gone through that personally.
Yeah.
But anyway, the organizers said that Israeli technology companies are taking this technology and exploiting it for governments like the US government to perpetuate this form of apartheid that marginalized communities have been living under. And Israel uses the same tactics abroad and over here in order to further their hegemony and their occupation of the people. Celebrite is used today to violate people's rights to due process, or these AI facial recognition technologies are used to attack and jail people, mostly disproportionately people of marginalized communities, the organizer told
The Real News
TRNN.
Network.
News Network. These have been tried and tested methods in Palestine for the past decades, and Israel does it to expand its territory, to further occupy and oppress people, to further the apartheid system that they are under. So, not to make, I'll make this connection later, but the idea that a ceasefire is happening in the guise that people think, oh, it's over now, is complete bullshit for this alone. Like, I'm not going to give this up, and especially given with Trump being president, as I said, because, as I said, you all going to be looking to protest. You all going to be wanting to stir the pot whenever Biden does some shit, and all the tech that Trump is going to use has been gifted by Biden, who is funding the police state more. And don't think just because of all of this, and again, this is kind of the issue, is that they need this in order to protect themselves. So if you know of this, and if you're talking about a ceasefire, as a good thing, wouldn't this essentially kind of be resolved as well? That's just in my mind. But we know that, again, and I don't want to say anymore because I really want to get into this later in the segment that I'm going to do after you.
Yeah.
But I think the connection needs to be made in the sense that truly, if there was something positive, then at minimum, a lot of this stuff that we're seeing with regards to Cop City, as far as the exchange of police, the exchange of tech, should also be resolved in terms of our policing as well. But that's not going to be happening anytime soon. If anything, that's going to be riled up a lot more. So to think that this ceasefire is actually doing something is really bad analysis. Yeah, I don't know. So it's just disappointing that people are not necessarily making that connection. But then again, I don't think that many folks are reporting on this in the way that we are, that we're able to make this connection.
Yeah. It's just anyway. I hadn't heard about that little Gaza thing. That is something I was not aware of.
That should probably be something we should worth looking at, because up until when you sent me this, I had no idea about this either. So
we had talked about facial recognition before when in regards to Palestinians. So I think I called it facial exploitation or something like that. So feel free to go take a look at that one. Does a lot more than just scanning your face. So, look out for that. But anyway, back to the article of hand.
In addition to supplying local law enforcement with surveillance, the organizers said that Israeli companies sell Celebrite universal forensics extraction hacking software and training to ICE, which gives them access to personal data. ICE officials have gone on multiple trips to Israel to swap best practices at checkpoints, prisons, settlements, and airports in Israel. The U.S. Department of Human Security has also been contracting with Israeli defense electronics company Elbit
Elbit.
Systems,
Yeah.
which we've talked about before.
Yes, we have.
For technology that surveils the U.S.-Mexico border in southern Arizona since 2014. The contract was extended by Department of Homeland Security in 2017 to further militarize the border using this technology.
And
Edith
if you don't
Romero,
think
an organizer
Trump's going to
with
be
Eye
on that business right there, good luck.
Right.
You know,
Edith Romero, an organization with Eye on Surveillance, said she sees parallels in the rhetoric Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli forces use for Palestinians and the language used in the U.S. to talk about immigrants. In the past, President-elect Donald Trump and Netanyahu have praised each other's border policies. Scroll down.
Yep.
They're using this to target immigrant communities and to arrest, to detain, and to separate families, and sometimes deportations, Romero said. Activists are fighting for liberation in the U.S. and Palestine. Some are already seeing victories. In 2020, Eye on Surveillance successfully advocated for a ban on facial recognition surveillance, providing in large part by Israeli companies in New Orleans. While parts of the ban were reversed in 2022, the organization continues to hold monthly meetings to push back against surveillance and policing. So that kind of brings up a point that I've said before, especially if you're an organizer / activist. If you get a win, you don't give yourself a pat on the back and say we're done. You keep working at it and to try and get a little bit more closer to the justice that you're seeing. Because the moment that you start slipping, the moment those things will possibly be put back in, and a lot worse than you were trying to advocate against. So it's good to see at least this group seemingly is continuing to push, even though they're getting wins. Additionally, they're looking to end economic ties between Israel and the city permanently and calling for the money to be redirected into the community. Renard Bridgewater, co-founder of Eye on Surveillance, said that so many things could be funded with the money that is going towards Israel and their continued onslaught and overall abuse and slaughter of Palestinian people. Bridgewater said that rather than funding law enforcement trips to Israel, cities should be supporting their residents by providing equitable living wages, education, affordable housing, and resources to solve food insecurity.
California, are you listening?
Right. Eye on Surveillance is also part of the Break the Bonds campaign in Louisiana, which aims to encourage state officials to divest from Israel. The state has over $40 million in bonds, which the organization said bolsters and supports Israel's economy. Bridgewater said that people can fight against police training exchanges and Israeli technology being used in the U.S. by organizing. Eye on Surveillance, Black Alliance for Peace, and U.S. Palestinian Community Network are some of the many organizations raising awareness about the issue. I think that small movements or small ripples certainly create larger movements and things of that nature, Bridgewater said. I think that anytime you have the opportunity to be able to build with folks, no matter if it's 2 or 3, that can eventually lead to 2 or 3,000, but it has to start somewhere, and it can't necessarily always be this very grandiose and very large, expensive ideas. It is important to get together and organize because as soon as we realize that our enemies are the same, the easier it is to realize who our allies are, said the organizer with no ship. Once we organize and put these 2 and 2 together, then we know who to put our effort against. So
I would also argue that like organizing for the small issues, right? Like specificity on that, I find like much more doable and important than like big overall ideas, because that's easier to co-opt, right? It's harder to co-opt when someone wants this specific thing, you know?
Right. But it's the same thing. And I think I've made this connection before. It's like if you're trying to lose weight, which actually both of us are. Like you don't start with your goal weight. Like you start with a manageable weight and hit that. And then once you hit that, what's the next thing? And then the next thing, and then the next thing. So like those little victories that you get will lead to bigger things in time. So, but it's the idea of like, what is the end goal and what are the steps that you need to do in the middle in order to get there? So, but I think we often think not to say you shouldn't, but you often think from point A to point B, but make no plan as to how you're going to get the B from point A. And so that's where people get tripped up or get frustrated and overwhelmed and they quit. So, but it's still the idea, as I said before, once you get those little victories, you keep at it. You don't stop until, so it's like the idea of Medicare for all, for example. Like, I know a lot of people in this space for a time were pushing for, national healthcare for all as the thing. Well, a lot of people were saying, maybe figure it out maybe on state level. I personally kind of think that makes a lot more sense because it's a lot more manageable to do it that way, but with the intent of hopefully building that out over the course of several states. I mean, that's kind of essentially any progressive policy has been implemented fully. Usually it takes way too long, but it's often started on state level and building out from there. So all of that said, though, the parallels that Victoria made between Palestinians and Black people, again, is also why I say those Black people who think that Israel has nothing to do with you, when you get beat up by the cops within the next 4 years, you can have Israel to thank for it. Because a lot of these cops have been trained by these forces and they're bringing the technology to surveil you, to target you, and to possibly kill you if given a chance. And I like how she kind of made it like, in the same way that you can view what's happening in Gaza as apartheid, we're kind of in a apartheid in of ourselves here, even though like people make the argument like Jim Crow, it still was kind of our equivalent of apartheid. A lot of the system still exists in this country. It hasn't completely gone away. So we're still under that same suppression, especially given the corporate class, especially if you're a person of color, to keep you under control, which is why I don't get the bullshit of like, Black people who are kind of like, I'm American and like blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, the same country that is oppressing you at every turn, like those are that's the God you're chasing. Okay. Go off, whatever.
I love how I threw in I threw in an MJ line that you went right past. What? We were like, don't stop, but I was like, till you get enough. Oh. You just kept moving. Don't stop till you get enough. Come on. What? Anyway, but yeah, no, I felt like this was a good part 2 to your, Cop City stuff last time. So sent it over. Definitely was worth a read. So links as always in the description if you want to go hook up the old ScheerPost with some clicks. I'm sure they appreciate it. But talking about these things is why we're demonetized. So go to co-fi.com/indienewsnetwork, scan that QR code on your screen. Or as always, links are in the doobly-doo if you want to find them there. But we get it. It's times are tough. Money is tight. Just like and subscribe. Hit the share button. Let us know what you think. Is any of this a problem in your area? I'm sure it is. But let us know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.